From one environmental catastrophe to a potential one. This is the Zaporizhzhia Nuclear Power Plant, the largest such facility in Europe, and responsible for 20% of all Ukrainian electricity production. And since the second week of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, it has had one more distinction: a battle site. Given Russia's plans to annex large swaths of eastern Ukraine, it was an obvious target for Russian capture, which did not take long to accomplish. Still the subject of drama after Ukraine had to retreat, much of that remained background noise for one simple reason: Russia was in control, and Ukraine was not in a position to contest it. The station lost external power at least a half a dozen times, leading to mild panic. But each time, everything came back together before a global crisis could unfold. However, the summer of 2023 changed all that. Kyiv began sounding a metaphorical fire alarm that Russia was planning to sabotage the plant. But what are the potential dangers here? Today, we're going to take a closer look at the problem. We will begin with an overview of the geography so you can better visualize what you are hearing in the news. Then we will move on to the briefest of summaries of how nuclear power plants operate, the motivation Russia may have to cause problems at the facility, why if there is a problem it will not be as bad as the Chernobyl disaster, the trouble it raises with NATO's Article 5 provision, and the crying wolf problem, and no, that is not a typo. As much fun as crying wolf will be, we start with the geography, aka nuclear power plants on maps. Here is southern Ukraine. We have the Crimean Peninsula there, of course. Kherson City is there. The Kakhovka Dam is, or was here, and will play an important role later. And if we continue upstream on the Dnipro River, we eventually get to the Zaporizhzhia Nuclear Power Plant. It will help to zoom in. The Dnipro River is now at the top of the screen. This satellite image comes from May 2022. This is a photo from June 15th, 2023, 9 days after the dam's destruction. You can see how the water level dropped. And if we really zoom in, you can see the power plant in the background. Then we have the cooling pond, and on the right we have the city built for power plant workers. But to get a real feel for the power plant itself, we need to zoom in a bit further. As a starting point, you have reactors 1 through 6 all lined up at the top. Below that are a pair of buildings that house and treat radioactive waste. Further below are spray ponds, which look pretty but are actually critical to the facility's cooling process. Again, note the reactors in the background, which makes the precise location of that photo about here. To the right is dry storage. In the upper left is the backup diesel generators in case of external power failure. And below that is a training facility that was hit early in the war, uncomfortably close to everything else of importance. Alright, bank that in your mind. Now we are going to move on to the second part of the overview, a ridiculously oversimplified explanation of how nuclear power plants work. Step 1. Mine uranium out of the ground. Unfortunately, less than 1% of it is suitable for nuclear reactions. Step 2. Concentrate it using a process known as enrichment. This has a whole bunch of sub-steps that we will gloss over, but I have previously covered in an old-school video. Gas centrifuges are the most well-known of these sub-steps. Rotate them around, and the uranium that you mined earlier purifies. Zaporizhzhia's reactors run on 4.26% enriched uranium, to be exact. Step 3. Have neutrons split the enriched uranium in a controlled, consistent manner. Create heat. Boil water. Turn turbines. Make electricity. But assuming you do not want to die, we are not done. Step 4. Keep cool water running to make sure that your reactor does not melt down. Step 5. For the same reason, continue to run cool water along spent fuel well after the power has stopped. Now that we have all of that covered, The critical question, of course, is why Russia might want to mess with the process. The basic idea is that Russia may be pessimistic about its chances of even holding onto the current territorial status quo. The breach of the Kakhovka Dam provides a template for this. The available evidence indicates that an internal explosion led to the failure of the Russian-controlled facility. Perhaps short on manpower for the front lines elsewhere, Russia ordered the breach so it could send soldiers previously guarding Kherson into the areas where Ukraine appeared to be focusing its counteroffensive. Doing so caused an environmental catastrophe and destroyed a large hydroelectrical plant. But if Russia believed its chances of holding the area were slim, it was a phantom trade-off anyway. The parallels in Zaporizhzhia are striking. Environmental catastrophe? Check. Destroyed power plant? Check. Pessimism about Russia's chances? The jury is still out there, but the Wagner opera began after the dam breach, so the signs there are not looking great. Meanwhile, Kyiv has indeed started some sort of offensive. Part of the main thrust is occurring at the crook in the river, and troops may have established a beachhead opposite of Kherson City. If things go wrong for Russia, Ukraine may quickly surround the power plant. Thus, the broad idea is that Russia might set some explosives around the plant and cause a giant headache for Ukraine. The best comparison is to Iraq igniting Kuwait's oil wells upon its retreat during the Persian Gulf War, except radiological. At a minimum, it might stall Ukraine's offensive. And as a worst-case scenario for Russia, it is a basic scorched earth policy. If I cannot have it, then you cannot have it either. However, the damage would have to be incredible before Ukraine completely abandons the plant. By comparison, the Chernobyl disaster occurred in 1986, but the last reactor there did not shut down until 2000. For its part, Russia claims that it has no such plans, and instead insists that Ukraine is scheming up a sabotage operation. The International Atomic Energy Agency is supposed to be the independent arbiter here. True to that, their inspectors have been on site since September 2022. Thus far, they cannot verify any evidence that Russia is going to detonate any lines to destroy the facility. But at the same time, Russia is not giving the inspectors access to the full site, including the rooftops, where Ukraine says the mines are located. That might make IAEA inspectors sound worthless. But the absence of information is information. The inability to verify something is telling, and concerning. As the IAEA hints at, if there really is no problem with the rooftops, then there is no reason to deny the inspectors access. That is the doom and gloom for you. But good news, this type of sabotage operation will not cause as bad of a disaster as you might think. Then again, if your expectations started here, that is hardly much comfort. Going back to the satellite image, there are many places you could detonate an explosive to cause problems. But let's start with the reactors as a focal point. Good news here. A blast akin to an actual nuclear weapon is literally impossible. Remember how Zaporizhzhia operates at 4.26% enriched uranium? Well, nuclear weapons have around 90% enrichment. Not even close here. That is why most of the comparisons you hear are in regard to the Chernobyl disaster. Nevertheless, there are three main reasons why Zaporizhzhia would have a hard time getting that far. First is that the plant is in cold shutdown. Chernobyl's big problem was that the reaction fueled itself. Run a nuclear reactor at full steam, and you can get a big boom. Zaporizhzhia's reactors are not currently doing this. The exact details of this are conflicting because, well, that is just the fun of war. But something like this is true. Soon after the IAEA inspectors arrived in September 2022, The majority of reactors went into cold shutdown. That is a fancy way of saying that they were no longer producing electricity. However, the fuel rods still retain heat and need constant cooling. This process relies on some of the other systems, but we will get to those in a moment. 2 of the reactors stayed in a hot shutdown. More of the passive reactions continued, generating useful heat for the facility and the surrounding neighborhood, but also facilitating a full restart at a later date. One of those 2 appears to have shifted to cold shutdown in May 2023, as concerns moved away from restarting full power production and to malicious destruction. There are conflicting reports on the final reactor, some suggesting that it went cold in June 2023, while others insisting that it is still hot. I believe the latter is more likely true, because it is what the IAEA is currently saying. I suspect that what is happening here is a combination of the media's ignorance on how nuclear power plants work, exacerbated by Wikipedia bluntly stating that it is off. Regardless, though the difference between hot and cold here is important, it does not change the fact that Zaporizhzhia cannot have a runaway meltdown in the style of Chernobyl. Second is the lack of graphite. Nuclear reactors need something to slow down neutrons. That facilitates the fission process by increasing the chances that they hit other uranium atoms. Graphite is one of the most cost-effective ways to do that. One problem: graphite is also flammable. Chernobyl? Full of graphite. Could not get enough of it. So when it lit up, it really lit up. But Zaporizhzhia is built different. No graphite moderator does not mean no problem, but it does mean a containable disaster. And that is the perfect segue to the third component, which is the literal containment apparatuses. These giant concrete buildings are part of that. They could withstand a small aircraft crashing into them, but are not designed to indefinitely survive an endless series of bombings. Inside each of these concrete monstrosities, you have a core, itself surrounded by a thick metallic vessel. Chernobyl's reactors did not have these safety features, which allowed the explosion to go unrestrained. Indeed, and ironically, a containment structure known as the sarcophagus was built after the fact to make up for the deficiency. Back in Zaporizhzhia, if just the concrete structure is breached, literally nothing happens. If just the metallic vessel is breached, then the building has a problem. Maybe make that one red. Only if both are breached, then the surrounding environment is at risk. Even then, because of the cold shutdowns, much of the radiation has already dissipated. The one that might be in hot shutdown is a little more concerning, but it is still not that bad. Outside of the reactor rooms, the obvious targets are the waste, dry storage, spray ponds, diesel generators, and external power. Hitting the waste is basically a build-your-own dirty bomb. The idea is the same for dry storage, except this waste is old enough that it no longer needs to be cooled, and is less radioactive. These would likely create localized problems, rather than something region-wide. The spray ponds are a roundabout target. They take warm water coming from the reactors and spent fuel systems, and use sprinkler lines to dissipate excess heat into the environment. Once cooled, the water can cycle back into the reactors and waste processing units. This recycling system is why the dam's destruction affecting the cooling pond did not create an emergency. It is a reserve system meant to keep the spray ponds full, and, at least in theory, you could use trucks to replenish the spray ponds. The shutdown status simplifies this because cooler reactors need less water anyway. Targeting the diesel backup generators or external power sources has a similar effect. Basically, you reduce the power plant to a single system to run its cooling processes. Regardless of how the cooling system breaks, if it does, then you are racing the clock against the possibility that radioactive materials melt through their protective plating, thereby risking neighboring watersheds. Given that the power plant is on top of a major river that flows into the Black Sea, that should be concerning. Anyway, if I had to guess what Russia might be trying to do here, a catastrophic problem is unlikely. That is because they would have to fire up a reactor again, and then intentionally run it past its capacity, while disabling built-in safety measures. How the nuclear physics behind all of that would work is unclear, because, and I know this will come as a surprise, nuclear scientists spend little time researching how to deliberately cause accidents. Doing so would make it impossible to pin the responsibility on Ukraine. The disaster would unequivocally be Russia's fault. At that point, Russia may as well just use a regular nuclear weapon. The only way Russia would try this is if Putin really does not care about the consequences from the West, or China, or India. Basically, we are reaching the point of a Mythbusters episode where they try to make something work despite their disbelief. A more plausible strategy would be to set charges on a concrete building and inside a reactor room. How far the damage would go from there depends on the artificial explosive power used. However, the most likely sabotage scenario is to do just a single thing. If Russia really wants to render the power plant's generation inoperable, soldiers could place charges on 1 to 6 vessels. The problem with this is that, because they are on the inside, Russia would have to claim that Ukraine infiltrated the facility. And the more Russia destroys, the less plausible that is. The other options have better plausible deniability. You could blow one hole in one rooftop and claim it as evidence of Ukraine's recklessness. Or do something similar to the diesel generators, or the spray ponds. This would not cause an immediate environmental crisis, but would force Ukraine to divert resources to solve the problem before it turns into one. Perhaps exactly what Russian soldiers are looking for to cover their broader withdrawal from the region. It would not provide the same clear benefits as expanding a river like the dam situation, but it is still something. To summarize the concerns, there is a reason why the American Nuclear Society has concluded that the risks to the public are low. Perhaps Russia could do something incredible in terms of deliberate sabotage, but this would be transparent to monitors, raising the question of why Russia would choose that option when they could do other things. Still, you might wonder about the possibility that we end up in an Article 5 situation. You will recall that Article 5 is the provision of the North Atlantic Treaty that declares that an attack against one member is an attack against all members. Well, let's take a look at a map, and maybe start drawing some lines. Recall that Zaporizhzhia is here, Turkey is here, Bulgaria is here, Romania is here, Hungary is here, Slovakia is here, and Poland is up there. This is a rough estimate of where the average radiation would be significant, assuming a worst-case scenario. That is, the reactor is on, and it blows through the vessel and concrete containment, probably because they've been sabotaged. Thus, Poland, Slovakia, and Hungary look pretty safe here, but Romania, Bulgaria, and Turkey we need to worry about. The exact problem locations depend on weather factors like rain, wind direction, and wind speed. Anyone want to place wagers on which way the wind flows on the day that Zaporizhzhia blows? Indeed, the winds in that region are unpredictable, making it difficult for Russia to guarantee that it will avoid hitting a NATO country. By the same token, it also makes it difficult for Russia to avoid hitting Russia. Also note that these are averages. In practice, with shifting winds, Romania might get really hammered, while Russia feels very little. Again though, this is a worst-case scenario. Given the earlier emphasis on localized problems, the baseline might look something more like this. The slight problem here is that the original estimate jutted so far south because of the waterway. Thus, even a localized problem could expand to somewhat affect the Romanian coast. Regardless, it is a good bet that any NATO member feeling the radiation is going to be tempted to invoke Article 5. What happens next is anyone's guess. Despite its vaunted status, Article 5 does not inherently do anything. Instead, NATO members will meet to decide whether the Article 5 claim is valid. Just imagine it. Lawyers asking whether if A attacks B and the consequence is a negative externality on C implies that A actually attacked C. Likewise, lawyers will have questions about quantity. If this is the region that has notable radiation increases, it is not as if areas further out receive none. Does that count toward Article 5? But like any other international law, splitting verbal hairs matters less than what member states just want to do, and it would be surprising if NATO did absolutely nothing. Whether that means rushing all sorts of weapons packages to Ukraine, or engaging in some kinetic response that targets the units responsible for the mission, remains to be seen. Certainly, the latter action comes with escalation risks that the former does not. The final point worth emphasizing is what I call the crying wolf problem. We are probably all familiar with the original parable. A boy in the fields tending his sheep gets lonely, so he cries out "wolf" to draw the attention of the other shepherds. And indeed, they come running to him. No more loneliness problem. The next day, the boy feels lonely again. Seeing the success of what happened last time, he cries out "wolf" once more. The shepherds remain diligent and rush to him. But on the third day, after another cry of "wolf," only a handful respond. On the fourth day, wolf cry again, and only one comes around. Then, on the fifth day, a wolf actually attacks his sheep. He cries out, but no one responds. His flock is eaten. The moral of the story? Never tell the same lie twice. Wait, that's not it. The moral of the story is that if you want to get help when it counts, you should not feign problems when, in truth, there are none. That is all well and good when the source of the problem is what us fancy social scientists call exogenous. That is, not a function of the intentional actions that people take. The construction of the word makes it easy to remember. But the logic breaks down when the cause of the problem is endogenous. That is, a function of the intentional actions that people take. To see what I mean, suppose that Russia was actually planning to blow the power plant, and Ukrainian intelligence gave Kyiv a forewarning about it. Understandably, Zelensky would want to shout this out from the rooftops. International pressure now comes bearing down on Russia. Perhaps China gets on the phone and threatens to turn its tacit support for Russia into outright resistance. Maybe the IAEA starts snooping around, thereby eliminating any plausible deniability that Russia had hoped for. Worried about the consequences, the Kremlin changes plans and keeps the power plant standing. From an outsider's perspective, it appears that Zelensky cried wolf. He said that Russia would attack, and then they did not. A few weeks later, Ukrainian intelligence picks up a Russian plot to use tactical nuclear weapons. Zelensky again raises the fire alarm. But this time, no one pays attention to him because he was wrong about the prior crisis. So Russia goes through with it unimpeded. Whoops. The point is that no matter how the Zaporizhzhia crisis ends, be careful on how you update your information. If you want to update your information on how the whole invasion got started using rigorous social science, you will love my book that examines its many possible causes. Check the video description for more on that. And if you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care. I made a small mistake last time with the hashtag whereseveryone challenge that basically made it impossible. And unfortunately, I did not realize this until the video went live. So here is the still frame. All three of them, Prigozhin, Gerasimov, and Surovikin, are there. Pause now if you want, because I'm about to reveal their locations. Where's Prigozhin? Off to the side. Where's Gerasimov? Pointing things out over there. And where's Surovikin? Front and center. They were in today's video as well, all in the same frame. Good luck locating them.